All right, got the camera rolling. Thanks, Caleb, for cleaning those up for me. All right, thanks. All right, we're going to continue our series in the intertestamental period. Before I do, let's go over some. Let's do a quick pop quiz real quick. What is Hellenism?
Greek influence.
Greek influence. Perfect. So what would be a Hellenistic Jew?
A Jew that believes what the Greeks have.
Not necessarily a Greek Jew, but a Greek sympathetic Jew. A Jew that says, yes, I'm okay with this Greek thought. Yeah, Sadducees. Pharisees and Sadducees. Who was more conservative? Pharisees, that's right. Sadducees. How much Old Testament did they accept?
First 5 books.
First 5 books, yeah. First 5 books. If you wanted to find someone that would have the Old Testament memorized, besides a Pharisee, who might you look for? A what?
A scribe.
Did you say scribe? It is a scribe, yes. And scribes, how do we describe scribes?
Like lawyers?
Yeah, like the lawyers of Jesus' day. They knew the law. They knew. Did they? Yeah, they didn't just know the law. They knew the oral law too, the traditions associated with the law. Some very, very smart people. Let's see. If you were not at the temple, but you wanted to meet together with your fellow Jews, where did you go? The synagogue. What is the word synagogue? What does that mean?
Gathering place?
Yeah, a gathering, a sitting together, basically. Now, if you were, I'm going to ask it a different way. What is a Herodian? Herodian.
People who follow Herod.
Yeah, a Jew sympathetic to Herod. Followers of Herod and the Herod family. Was the Herod family a godly family?
No.
Not at all. If you were to describe Jews that decided we're just going to run away from Hellenization altogether, what would you call these Jews? What is a group? Yeah, what? The Essenes, yeah, definitely, you're right. If you wanted to describe a group that said, we're going to stand up and we're going to fight, pick up swords and we're going to fight.
Zealots.
Zealots. And if you wanted to describe an underground organization that may have been comprised of zealots who actually were stabbing people who were sympathetic to Rome, what group is that?
Sicars.
Good job. Sicarii, yeah. Yeah, this underground, the dagger people. Now, last week we were talking about a very, very significant event. The word means dispersion, spreading around. Yeah, what is that we talked about? What was the technical word?
Diaspora.
Yeah, diaspora, which simply that means the dispersion, the Jews being dispersed. Now, did that happen all at one time, or did that happen numerous times? Many times. Yes, there is an ultimate, there is kind of a final one that we're going to see in around 80, 70, but many times you go back to 722 BC. And these are the dates that I was told to memorize in school. They're kind of the significant ones that we try to go over. 722 BC and 586. I hear it both ways. Sometimes I hear it 587. So what's significant about these two dates? 722. What's significant about 722?
Is that the destruction of the North Kingdom?
The northern kingdom is wiped out by whom?
Assyrian.
The Assyrian powerhouse comes and it destroys the north. And for more than 100 years, the south, Judah, survives and does pretty well until what happens to the south? Babylon comes and exiles them. And this is not clean cut. 10 years before this, they have an exile where, was it 10,000 Jews? Several thousand Jews were exiled first, taken away to Babylon. And then there was a big thing that happened in 586, one of the biggest ones. So we talk about that. In between here, we have something that happened in 701. You remember that significant thing in 701? Does anyone remember this? It was significant to the mindset of Jews, of Israelites.
Wasn't the destruction of the temple?
The destruction of the temple came later. It was close to the destruction of the temple, though. I think 701 is cool, but that's just a me thing. Anyone know what happened in 701?
701 theology.
You remember 701 theology? I'm glad you remember that because that is significant. What happened in 701 shaped the Israelites' thinking in a very significant way. So we know 722, the Assyrians have captured the north, right? The powerhouse, they've taken over the north. But come on, this is Assyria. They're not going to settle for just the northern kingdom. They're going to take it all. And so King Sennacherib of Assyria starts making his way down south into Judah, and one by one takes over city after city after city until he's got 46 cities that he's conquered. And then he surrounds the capital city of Judah. What is the capital city? Jerusalem. He's surrounding it in the days of a king named Hezekiah. And Hezekiah prays to God, says, God, we can't defeat this army, but we're trusting in you anyway. And the Assyrian commander, Rabshakeh, that's a fun name to say if you want to say it, Rabshakeh. That's the guy. He taunts Judah and he says, hey, what God has ever stopped the Assyrian king Sennacherib from defeating his enemies? Your God's no different. He's on our side, you know. All this big taunt. And I love it because God, through the prophet Isaiah, sends a message to Hezekiah. And what's the message say? Summary. What is the summary message that God tells to Hezekiah?
Because of... Oh, no, never mind. I'm thinking of his prayer. Because of your sake. Or whatever.
Oh, yeah, he prays. So, does Hezekiah need to worry about Sennacherib of Assyria? No. God says, don't you worry about him, because he didn't just threaten you, he threatened me. And I love it because God says, in essence, he says, I know where you live. Just to hear God say that is just, that's a pretty chilling thought. God says, you want to pick a fight with me? I know where you live. Okay, this is not a problem for you. And so in 701, we read overnight, 185,000 Assyrian troops surrounding the city of Jerusalem die. And how did God do it? How much work did it take for him to deal with the entire Assyrian problem? You remember? One angel. Now you think about that. Jesus, before the cross, dealing with that whole thing, he says, hey, don't you think I could call on my Father? If I wanted to get out of this, don't you think I could call on my Father and immediately at my disposal there'll be something like 12 legions of angels? Legion would be anywhere from 3,000 to 6,000, I think, depending on how you compute it. Okay? 3,000 to 6,000 angels times 12, what's that math? I don't know, 72,000 to 36 to 72. Well, 50,000 angels. We'll play it safe. 50,000 angels. It only takes one to deal with the most powerful nation in the world and wipe out their army. And Jesus said, I've got 50,000 ready to help right now. Jesus has no problem here, right? That's what I love about that. So, 701 theology. In 701, God killed the Assyrian army, saved the Israelites. But they were, I'm using that term loosely, they were from Judah, the Jews who were alive. He saved them. And because of that, they thought, we really are God's chosen people. We've been saved. God never will let anything bad happen to us, to his people, where his temple is. They developed this mindset that basically said, we're untouchable. God is always on our side. And prophet after prophet has to warn them, no. What happened to these people because they disobeyed in the north will happen to you too in the south. You better shape up. But over and over again, they were influenced by this idea, this misguided idea that God's always going to take care of us. He's going to get us out of every problem. We're his chosen people. And yet, God finally made it clear, I'm going to disperse you. And they hold out, the South holds out longer, but it does happen. It actually does happen. Why is that important? Why bring up the 701 theology now? Well, because I think a lot of churches, in the general sense, are teaching a doctrine very, very similar to this 701 theology. The idea that God will never, ever, ever reject his people. Now, is God faithful? Of course God's faithful. We're not saying that. But they had this misguided idea that we could just treat God like dirt and he has to come to our rescue because we are his. And he will. It's as though God is got no choice but to take care of us. And God made it clear that's not at all how this works. It is not how this works. And God has made it very clear throughout the New Testament, right? Throughout Scripture that we've got to stand firm. We've got to hold on. We've got to fight that good fight. Which, by the way, why do you say stand firm if there's no way you could ever fall? That's kind of a point this morning, right? Don't fall. I'm laying down. Yeah, but don't fall. I'm on the ground. You know what I mean? That doesn't make any sense, you know. A lot of these scriptures don't make any sense. The same way of thinking creeps in today, and I, got to learn from the past. So the many different dispersions in this diaspora that we were discussing, and this gets us into something that we kind of ended with, and it's so controversial. We're talking about, 1948, where they opened up Israel to become a nation again, and everyone, in Palestine was so happy that that happened. And what was the criteria they said for allowing people to come in there? You got to be Jews. Well, how do you know you're a Jew? Do you feel like a Jew? Do you identify as a Jew? It seems as though that was kind of, according to the guy that taught this to me, that was essentially the way he described the criteria that the man who actually was in charge of that said. Basically, if they identify or if they feel like they are, then that's good enough.
Hitler had like a looser definition of a Jew than that. 1/4, like one of your grandparents.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
One of your grandparents was Jewish. You get to trace back 4 of them. And
Wow.
That's kind of weird that they just go up.
Yeah, well, and part of the reason why this gets into something that I freely admit I know very, very little about, but I like to pass on what I do know, because it's interesting to me. But clearly there's a modern day group of people that say they're Jews for sure, and we recognize them. They tend to look a certain way and be a certain way and stuff like that. But does that modern day group trace back to the original Abraham, Isaac, Jacob Jewish people? And the easy, clear-cut answer is no. No, there's no known identifiable way to trace them back. The record's gone. You can't do it. Someone that's really spent a lot of time looking into this has figured out that the earliest they can go back was somewhere in the neighborhood of, I believe it was the 1400s. A modern day Jew can go as far back as the 1400s in tracing their lineage, but can't go further than that. Yeah.
Have you heard about this thing where you can get a DNA test to find out whether you have Jewish blood?
I've heard about something similar to that, because we talked about that. Well, I don't know if I mentioned that specifically, but last week there's a guy that uses some of that line of reasoning to express his thoughts on the Jews.
But you call them, they send you a packet, you do something with it, you send it back.
Really?
They analyze it, you gotta pay, $500 or whatever it is, and then you get something in the mail saying the percentage chance of you being Jewish.
That's interesting. So they would associate it with regions, basically, and what we know about.
I guess so, I don't know, I don't know if it's legit.
Well,
I'm
the
not
problem
sure.
is, though, what's your frame of reference? Because if somebody says, I'm Italian, why? Because I can trace it back, 10, 12 generations to Italy. That still doesn't mean that you're connected to ancient Rome. Just because your family's been there 1,000 years doesn't mean it goes back 2,000 years. So.
Very true. And that's why this gets controversial. And I'm saying it to you guys because, as far as I know, none of you are modern day Jewish. So I don't think I'm really going to hurt your feelings, because I have no desire to hurt somebody's feelings with this. But there's a group of people today that are holding out for the Messiah because they didn't think it was Jesus, and so there must be another one coming. It can't be. It cannot be. The record is gone. There is no way you could find a Messiah to fulfill the scriptural mandates. He cannot be of the line of David, and we ever know it. If it wasn't Jesus, there is no way we can trace David's line. You know what I mean? It's just powerful evidence for the fact that Jesus is the one. So, modern day Jews, man, if you get on the internet, you can find some crazy stuff on this, and a lot of them are very conspiratorial. It's interesting. But they trace back to, some say they trace back to a group of people called the Khazars in the region of Turkey, I believe. Anyway, different region. They trace back to this group that eventually migrated into the ghettos and Hitler. We pick it up from there and we kind of understand what happened. But that they are not the same group of people that would have come from actual, even the region where Judah was and stuff. Now, I try to watch both sides of these things, and so there's someone else that tried to defend and say, no, hold on. A lot of modern day Jews really can trace their lineage back. However, even that person conceded that, only on a statistical basis using DNA, and it's just a matter of probability, and we're still not really sure. There's a whole lot of that. Now, I emailed one of my professors about this because I said, hey, here's the evidence on the other side. Have you looked into, that? Because I know he's done a lot of research. So I just thought, might as well share what the smarter person says, just in case you find it interesting. He challenged me. He said, find any 25-year-old encyclopedia and read it on the Jews. And he said, you're going to read that the majority of scholars believe that the Eastern Jewry are the Khazars. You're going to read that in an old dictionary, most of them. You also have to pay attention to the people who are arguing against this. Are they Zionists? Are they, secretly on the side of, that's something to think about. Then he says in the early 70s, he went to the big library in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and he looked up the references to the Khazars and Khazaria, and he found it in every single encyclopedia there in the 70s, what we were just talking about. 20 years later, he came back and he looked for it. He did not find it anymore. He only found it in 2 encyclopedias, and those 2 particular encyclopedias were not in the general public side of the library. You actually had to get access to even see them. And so, this means a lot to him, and I do find it interesting, like, why is it that there's been this massive shift in 20 years where all of a sudden something that was commonplace, even in Jewish encyclopedias, is now changed? Did we miss the memo that there was this big new discovery? I can't say I've heard about some radical new discovery of origins. So I just share that with you because I just thought that was very interesting. And he says, Jewish publications, there's a lot of power there, there's a lot of pull there, and just think about what can be changed. Why does this actually matter? Where does the rubber hit the road? Because I'm not just trying to pick on modern day people. However, there are church groups teaching, preaching, they're all over TV. They're saying that in order to fulfill prophecy, we need to fly Jews back to their homeland. Modern day Jews. We need to spend money. And the church a few years back, I don't remember if it was in the neighborhood of $42 million in 1 year, they spent flying Jews back in order to fulfill prophecy, they said. And there's just better things we could be spending money on. You know what I mean? There are people that need to hear the gospel, not people that are somehow entitled to a free ticket because they happen to be born in the right family. Yeah.
Don't they too need like the line of, was it Aaron or Levi, the priest line?
Why would they need that? You're right.
In order to
Why
do
would
the
they need that?
sacrifices.
If
And
you
then
want to
name
have
the
a
temple.
rebuilding of the temple, you would need to have the priests, and the proper priests are of the tribe of Aaron's line, right? Aaron's family. Now, modern day, you're going to hear about, the Kohathites are a tribe that were a tribe of priests, a group of people that were a group of priests of Aaron's line. And even today, the name Cohen is a name that modern day Jews, as I understand it, associate with the priesthood. And a lot of times they still honor that name today as like a priestly name. But just because that's true, good. But I don't think there's any actual connection that's been found that can trace it all the way back to Aaron's line. And that's important because if you're a modern day convert. You say, oh, I'm a proselyte. I'm just a convert to Judaism because God still believes this is true. God wants us to rebuild the temple, and he wants, his special Jewish nation to thrive, and I just want to be a convert to it. You still got problems because you can't fulfill the law. You have no priestly line. Priests cannot be converts to priesthood. Remember that, right? Even Levites, even they had to be of the tribe of Levi, of Aaron's family. If you're not that, you can't be a priest. But wait, other Levites can be priests, right? I mean, remember Korah, Dathan, and God doesn't really care. We can just substitute priests, right? How did God feel about substitute duties of the priesthood? Remember the ground swallowed those people up, and then God sent lightning or fire, and it fried all the rest of their followers. I think God's pretty clear, this family, because I said so. And look at these staffs. Aaron's rod is budding. That's strange. Why? Because God chose that man. So all of this, you can't take part of it. You got to take all of it. So why am I talking about this? You guys know better. You guys are smart. It's just interesting. It really is, and it's just permeating our society today.
Mind-blowing how people can look at this, swear by their books of the Bible, and then use common sense. And it's
Yeah.
gone. There's no common sense.
Yeah, it's, man. Remember the early Jews and how they felt. We're going to talk about Samaritans in just a bit, but how they felt about Samaritans, the Jews that intermarried with others. Ooh, that's awful, So back then, they took their lineage very, very seriously. Why do you think there are so many genealogies in the Bible? Those parts that you're like, oh, do I have to read this today? He begot this, who got that, who had the father of him, father of her. Why are we doing it? Because it mattered who your parents were. That was important. If you weren't of the right tribe, you're not the right person, in many cases. So it's just very different. Now, I'm glad you brought up DNA testing, and I find it interesting, but even the stuff I've seen appears to only be a probability, like, oh, there's this % chance. And even then, it seems like they're, because how are you going to get accurate DNA of Jews? Like, are there that many that they found that we can extract DNA from? And if there are, teach me about it later, because that's going to blow my mind. Fine. Okay, we talked about the synagogue, I believe. Okay, yeah, we talked about that. So, where I want to pick up all this leading, the Septuagint. The Septuagint. Anyone heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have. What's the abbreviation for the Septuagint?
It's like XXL1 or something.
Close, yeah, not Super Bowl, but LXX. LXX. The Roman numeral, the 70. A lot of times in modern day Bibles, you'll probably see this in your footnotes too, that the Septuagint reads or the LXX reads. They'll just abbreviate it. That means the Septuagint. What was the Septuagint?
Greek translation of the Old Testament.
Yeah, it was the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Why does it need to be translated into Greek?
Because they're so Hellenized, they didn't know Hebrew anymore.
Yeah, the Hebrew language was going away and, all but gone. So the Greek is what everyone spoke. Greek was the language of the day. So the Old Testament was translated into Greek so that all the common Jews, the common people could understand it. Jesus quotes from this version, from the Greek translation of the Old Testament there. The Septuagint. Interesting legend associated with how this thing came to be. And I think it's legendary because I don't think it's true. But the legend goes that in 250 BC, a guy named Ptolemy Philadelphus handpicked people from the 12 tribes, 6 people from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, if they're descent somehow. And you got a total of 72 people. So roughly the 70, right? The 70. And what was also interesting, I didn't write this down in my notes, but what I had heard about this was that groups of these people went away, I think it was even individuals, all went away into separate rooms to translate the Old Testament. And when they came out, they all had the exact same translation. Whoa. Must have been inspired. So, I'm just not so sure that is actually the case. That's a legend associated with it. However, one thing we can be sure of, the Septuagint has the Old Testament books of the Bible. And when they have the Old Testament books of the Bible, that would include books like Daniel. The book of Daniel is in the Septuagint. Now, why, some of you know this, why does it matter that the book of Daniel is actually in the Septuagint, something that's at least 250 BC or older? Why would that be of importance to us?
Because of his prophecies.
Yes. Daniel is so prophetic. And we talked about this a little bit. It's as though history is written before it happens in sequence for you. You know, we talked about, in my sermon, we talked about Daniel chapter 2 in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, but you get towards the end of Daniel, and it's as though point by point by point, this leader comes, then that one takes over, this Greek person comes, that one takes over, this happens. It's as though he is just saying everything that's going to happen before it happens. So, people who have a bias against Scripture being supernatural, a bias against miracles and prophecy of the future and that sort of thing, to them, they have to explain this. So the easiest way for them to explain it is to say, this stuff had already happened by the time Daniel wrote. Daniel wrote his book much, much later than we thought, after all these things have happened to the Greeks. And that's why it looks like prophecy, but it's really not. He's just saying things that have already happened. But you got a problem. How did Daniel make it into the Septuagint then? A book which is at least a few hundred years before Christ, at least. And by the way, there's worse evidence than that. Is it Ezekiel or, man, I don't remember. Do you remember which one of the prophets cites Daniel, says even if these three men,
Ezekiel does twice.
Ezekiel does? So what does he say? Even if these three men were among you, what does he say? Moses, Daniel, or Elijah? Samuel and Elijah? Okay. Anyway, calls out Daniel by name. And that's even older. So now liberal scholars are saying, well, there was another Daniel. And apparently he was prominent. I'm like, really? Prominent like Samuel and Elijah level prominent? And I never heard about it until you guys just enlightened me. Thank you so much. No, you know, it's just funny the things that we'll do to try to get away from the obvious. So that's what we have associated with the Septuagint. In your Bible, LXX, you read it, that's what it's probably talking about, the Septuagint, for their translation. Not perfect, not inspired, just a translation that they used. So that's important to point out. Next, we've got the Sanhedrin. And we've talked about this already. What did we say about the Sanhedrin? Did I say anything about the Sanhedrin? I'm pretty sure I did. What do you know about the Sanhedrin?
Real political.
Real political, yeah. It's a ruling group of people. This would be a group of 70 members from Pharisees and Sadducees and the high priest as well. 70 members from the Pharisees, Sadducees, and the high priest. Now, from Aaron all the way up to Annas, remember Caiaphas and Annas in the days of Jesus, there were 84 high priests. And the priesthood, you remember in Christ's day, it had become corrupted. It was more of a political thing. And, you know, it wasn't the same way as it should because Zachariah and Elizabeth, you know, John the Baptist's father, he was getting to go into the temple, and that was as though it was his once-in-a-lifetime chance. Well, wait, that's not how it was supposed to work in the Old Testament. You know, it was an annual thing for the high priest, but they seem to have a different system. A lot of corruption had taken place by then. Rabbinic tradition will tell you that this goes back to Moses. If you recall in the Old Testament, Moses had a council of wise men, of 70 men around him. And so rabbinic tradition says, oh, that's this council traces its roots all the way back to Moses, but that's just a tradition. Some synonyms to this would be the word council or assembly. The word, as I understand it, just literally means a sitting together. Sanhedrin, a sitting together, so like a council or assembly. We have historical records that seem to show that they are around about 250 BC. It included people like Nicodemus, Joseph of Arimathea, but once you get to AD 73, it's gone. It is no more. So that's the Sanhedrin. If you have any questions on that, I probably can't answer. But throwing that out there. Another group of people that we've touched on already is a group called the Publicans. Now that's a fancy way of saying, what is a publican? You guys know what a publican is. There's a story of the Pharisee and the publican, and the Pharisee prays this amazing prayer: God, I thank you that I'm just so good. Then the publican beats his chest and says, it's a tax collector. Yeah, that's all it is. Publicans are tax collectors. They were allied with Rome, and they were allowed to collect money from the Jews. And what's interesting too is they actually had to submit bids. There was a bidding system so that whichever Jew said, oh, I can collect Rome more money, I can get more out of these people, highest bidder would take it, and Rome would say, all right, you have our power to be the tax collector. So I'm sure you know how wonderful Jews would view these kind of people. So explain to me why Jesus walked up to Levi, aka Matthew, who was a what? A tax collector, and said, hey, come, you follow me.
Is he showing that anybody can be a follower?
I think he was showing something important, don't you? That maybe you don't have to be really good in order to follow Christ.
Yeah. Weren't they also seen as like collaborators with the enemy?
Yeah, they very much so.
So if somebody
They are
would see
stealing our
somebody
money
like-
and giving it to the enemy.
Yeah, so if we were to see somebody like that follow Jesus, then that's like the worst you can get.
Yeah.
As far as Jews are concerned.
Yeah. Remember the really short guy that was also a tax collector?
Zacchaeus.
Zacchaeus, yeah, we sing about him. But isn't it interesting how, when he meets Jesus, he doesn't remain the same. What does he say? If I cheated someone, what am I going to do about it? I'll pay them back 4 times, fourfold, yeah. So he was a changed man. However, I don't recall any scripture that says, I quit being a tax collector. I'm never going to do that. All I recall is a scripture that said, if I've cheated anyone, I'm giving this possessions away, and if I've cheated anyone, I'm going to pay them back. And what does Jesus say about that? Salvation's come to this household. Wait, how can this be a kingdom? He's still a tax collector. Shouldn't this be a hint that Christ's kingdom is not really of this world? It's not really a physical kingdom? It should be, because that doesn't make a lot of sense. If he's trying to raise a following to conquer Rome, why would you be allied with and have some of your closest followers be people who are taking money and giving it to Rome? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. So, this goes to the reasons why people would hate Jesus and think he's such an awful person and stuff. But obviously he's not. He's Jesus. So. Now you can also imagine how a tax collector felt around the Sicarii. Those dagger people. They were coming for him. All right, another group of people. Sorry, so many of these groups, but once we've done all this and we jump to the history side of things a little more so, I think we'll be able to go through it pretty quickly because we'll have a lot of this stuff in mind. Samaritans, the half-breeds, they would say. Assyrians took 27,000 Jews of Samaria and they scattered them throughout the world, and they conquered them. And they were mixed with everyone else. They really lost a lot of their Jewish identity, if not entirely, because they were all spread out. And so this group of people in the north were Samaritans. They were not fully blooded Jews. They had intermarried with others. And this particular group of people did not worship at the temple. They worshiped at a mountain called Mount Gerizim. They accepted just the Torah. Now what is the Torah? First 5 books, yeah. What about, there's another term called the Tanakh. Do you know what the Tanakh is? That's the whole Old Testament. Torah is the first 5 books. Tanakh is the entire thing, just in case somebody throws that at you. Technically, it's Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, and all that means is law, prophets, writings. Writings would be all the other, small prophets and things like that, and wisdom literature. So you put all that together, the Tanakh refers to the entire Old Testament, but the Torah is, strictly speaking, the first 5 books. So it's an important distinction because some people will throw around the Torah, but you need to pay attention. Like, do you really mean all the Old Testament, or do you mean the law of Moses in particular? They, in particular, focused only on the Torah, the law of Moses. And their Pentateuch, first 5 books, Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, actually had some differences to it when compared to like the one that we would see today. You know? And I'm not exactly sure what some of the differences were. Didn't really comment on that, but it's interesting. It's interesting. It kind of, to me, it makes me think of a group of people that are like, well, you know what, we're going to make the most of our situation, and we'll incorporate some of our heritage to kind of go with us. We'll worship God, but at a mountain, not at the temple. And we'll accept his word, these books, and we'll reword a few things, you know. It's interesting because when Jesus talks to a Samaritan woman, which what's he doing that for, you know, whoa. She asks him a question. As soon as Jesus calls her out for something that she's clearly like, where do we worship? I got a question for you because you're obviously a prophet. Where should we worship? Does Jesus say, oh, it's okay, as long as you love God, doesn't matter where you worship? Is that what Jesus told her? What did Jesus actually say to her? Is worship supposed to be at the temple at that time or at Mount Gerizim? It's actually supposed to be at the temple. He said it rather gracefully, I think, rather nicely. And he said, hey, there's going to come a time where my worshipers, they'll worship in spirit and in truth. But essentially, he suggests the Jews have it right here. But it's interesting that he would even talk to someone like that. A woman from that line. Just kind of unheard of. So let's see, there's a lot of different things associated with this group. Even though they tried to hold on to some of their identity, you read in Ezra chapter 4, a group of these Samaritan people, these ones that have intermarried, wanted to come back and help with you're rebuilding the temple? You're reestablishing Judaism? Yeah, we want to join in. We'll help you. Do you remember what Ezra said? What was told to these people who wanted to help build the temple?
Basically,
No.
told them to get away.
Leave. You have no part in this. Sounds pretty harsh, doesn't it? Why would they be so harsh? Well, maybe, just maybe, Israel's finally learning a lesson. You don't just do God things. You do God things God's way. You do it the way he said to do it. And God said his people are supposed to be distinguished, that we are not to intermarry. And so when we are rebuilding God's temple, we are not going to get absorbed into other nations around us. Every time they did get absorbed to other nations around them, they started intermarrying and things like that. The false worship came with it. And before long, they were serving God, yeah, and this idol on this next day. Serving God here, but then this other, you know, Asherah or Baal or whatever it was. It caused them so much trouble. And what is interesting is that after God did this awful judgment, 722, thought they were okay at 701, then 586, and then he allows a really, really small group of people later to come back and rebuild the temple. That group of people, as they grew, they got a lot of things wrong, for sure. They were not perfect. But they did a pretty good job of holding on to the worship of God and making a strong distinction that, you know, worship of God and not incorporating other idols with that. So maybe they weren't the smartest people, but I think you could make an argument that they finally learned their lesson. That you do not mix with other religious groups. You don't make. They were very careful about being distinct, by and large. You know what I mean? Yeah. Also, I have a note here that the Samaritans joined with the Syrians against the Jews. That would be very telling of how they felt about some of the Jews. It's interesting. That's where I want to leave this. Do you guys have any questions or comments or thoughts up to this point? 'Cause I feel like we're going over all kinds of stuff, but what are you even thinking? Since you have
You know what? Coming that back, I'm just, I don't have a great reading like a lot of you guys do, like especially like you. But I'm having a hard time getting perspective on where things are. I mean, I hear names, and it's not necessarily the names of just places, but names of not names of just places, but people, and like, you say they're from here, from there, and from that.
Yes.
Where can I literally find a great map?
Ooh, okay. I'll have to get back with you on that. The good news is, this TV has been broken for a few weeks, and normally I like to put the maps up there. It's a struggle for
Okay.
me to not have them too, as you can probably tell. But we're getting 2 more TVs in its place. And so hopefully we'll actually have some stuff up there.
Right on. Oh,
I'll
yeah.
be able to. Thank you for bringing that up, because it is true. It's not the same without visuals, because there are so many names, and then associate names with locations. It's like, whoa. And then we got time, and you factor all this together, and it turns into a blender sometimes. Yeah, definitely. Trying to think though, does Blue Letter Bible have some good maps? Have you guys found any good Bible map websites out there that you'd recommend? I don't know that I have. There's probably a Bible Atlas site or something that we're looking into.
Yeah, what is that website on there?
You got one?
Yeah, they find out where it is, but they didn't say.
Oh, okay.
There's like 6 of them or 7 of them, I'm like, yeah.
Oh, yeah, there's, I'm sure there's
Good
lots,
times.
for sure. Anyone else got any comments or thoughts before we? Let me go ahead and pray. We're a little bit over time, but let's go ahead and pray. Father, I want to thank you for the identity that we all have in you, and that we don't have to try to be exclusive per se, and we're not really segregated, because your son died for everyone. You sent your son because you love the whole world. So God, help some of that world that doesn't know you right now to want to join this family, because we want them to, and we know you want them to. There's obviously, when we look at history, we learn that there's a lot of not only mistakes made, but there were a lot of tensions and fights and things that had to be worked through. And that's not a lot different from where we are, God. I know even amongst your people, we sometimes feel tension, and we sometimes can give the enemy a foothold. So I pray that you give us extra compassion and extra thoughts towards the idea of unity and towards peace with each other. Thank you so much that we are a family. Thank you that your kingdom is strong, and we never have to worry about it becoming weak. And I just pray that you give us boldness throughout this week to be good servants of you. And it's in Jesus' name I pray.
Seth? Hey, I was learning a lot from you.